Christmas 1975 was supposed to be the start of a new chapter for Carol Ann Rofstad. A psychology major at Illinois State, Carol stayed behind on campus just long enough to work one last retail shift before heading to her parents' home to spend Christmas break. But Carol never made it. On December 23rd, the classy and kind sorority treasurer was found brutally beaten right outside her own front door. It's a case defined by a single, blood-stained railroad tie and a mystery that has frozen in time for nearly 50 years. Carol Ann Rofstad was born on March 10, 1954, in Elk Grove Village, Illinois, to Robert Rofstad Sr. and Lillian Votipka. She was the oldest of 3 children and was the kind of big sister people say they'd be lucky to have. She did well in school and, after graduating, enrolled at Illinois Wesleyan University before later transferring to Illinois State University. She joined Delta Zeta and quickly fit right in and was eventually elected treasurer of the sorority. She was described as a well-spoken, intelligent individual who excelled in her studies. She had so much promise until the tragic evening of December 22, 1975. That evening, Carol worked a final holiday shift at Heck's clothing store while most other students had already left for winter break. She then had dinner with a friend at the Velvet Freeze before heading to a local tavern called The Cellar. After she and her friend found the bar unusually quiet, they decided to head home, parting ways at the corner of Fell Street, a short distance from the Delta Zeta sorority house. Just outside the house, between 10 and 10:15 p.m., Carol was attacked. A possible eyewitness saw 2 white males in the area around that time, one of whom was carrying a club. Unfortunately, she wasn't found until noon the following day, when a passerby walking their dog nearby heard her moans. Carol was found unconscious and had been lying in the cold for approximately 12 hours after being bludgeoned. There were also signs that she was suffering from hypothermia. She was quickly airlifted to a hospital and underwent immediate emergency brain surgery, but despite being placed on life support, she never regained consciousness or opened her eyes again. She sadly passed away 2 days later on Christmas Eve, 1975. While it's suspected she was sexually assaulted, the only real clue was a large railroad tie with blood on it that was found nearby. It's long been suspected as the murder weapon. In the days following the attack, investigators collected Carol's clothing and other physical evidence and sent it to the Illinois Bureau of Identification for analysis. But the forensic tools available in 1975 were limited. Hair comparison, one of the primary techniques used at the time, relied on visual and microscopic analysis, a method we now know is basically junk science. Lab results from the case show that multiple items of Carol's clothing were examined, yet again and again, nothing of evidentiary value was found. Years later, the items were checked again using advancements in DNA testing, and this time they discovered male DNA on her panties and clothes. While the sample was too degraded and limited for a full autosomal DNA profile, it was sufficient for YSTR testing, a form of analysis that traces male genetic lines through the Y chromosome. This type of testing can exclude suspects and identify paternal family lines, but it requires known comparison samples to move forward. The problem with the DNA is that in 1975, there was a high risk of contamination at the crime scene. So even if they locate a suspect using the DNA, it wouldn't prove by itself that they were the killer and not just someone who touched the evidence decades ago. There's also an issue with the suspected murder weapon. Apparently, at some point, the piece of wood, described early on as a railroad tie, was removed from police custody and loaned out for instruction purposes, under the belief that the case it was attached to was closed. The item was reportedly returned, but what happened to it afterward and where it ultimately ended up remains unknown. Then comes the problem with the eyewitness. Retired Chicago homicide detective George Siebel, who spent years investigating the case, has rejected the eyewitness account as unreliable because the person claimed they saw the suspect's eye color, even though it was 10 o'clock at night, which he said makes no sense to him. Instead, he believes Carol was attacked by one man, and he believes he knows who that man is. He first came across the name in the summer of 1976, when the Chicago Police Department was contacted by the police in Normal, Illinois, asking him and his partner to check out an address in LaGrange tied to a possible suspect. That name came up again 10 years later when a former sorority sister reached out to George about the man. She said the man had been a prominent and controversial student on the Illinois State University campus in 1975. He then interviewed nearly 25 other people, mostly Carol's former friends, and almost all of them pointed to the same individual. Unfortunately, when he took his findings to the Normal Police Department in 2008, they were still fully trusting polygraph exams and told George that the individual had been ruled out because he passed one. The Normal Police Department should have been well aware of the unreliability of polygraph exams in 2008 because of a series of legal and scientific rejections that spanned decades. The biggest report was in 2003 from the National Academy of Sciences report that concluded in a comprehensive review that the scientific basis for polygraph testing was, and I quote, weak, and its accuracy for screening purposes was insufficient for national security reliance. 5 years earlier, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled that polygraph evidence could be barred from trials, with the majority opinion stating there is, and I quote, no consensus that polygraph evidence is reliable, and describes the accuracy as little better than could be obtained by the toss of a coin. Before retiring, Detective George conducted nearly 200 interviews and turned over roughly 50 pages of documents to the Normal Police Department in 2008. But he was met with a serious case of arrogance from the Normal Police Department, which, tragically, is a lot like other homicide departments around the country. Because they're not more open to accepting help from the outside, even from other police departments, many cold cases remain unsolved. He said he was basically told they weren't going to do anything with any of the information he provided. To this day, he still believes he knows who the killer is, but unless the Normal Police do something, Carol's case will never be solved. If you or anyone you know has information that could help solve the murder case of Carol Ann Rofstad, please contact Detective Nicole Bruno at 309-454-9702 or submit an anonymous tip through the Normal Police Department app. Carol was murdered around Christmas of 1975, and as of March 2026, her case remains unsolved. On the cold winter night of January 10, 1996, a violent struggle unfolded at the rural home of beloved teacher 25-year-old Amy Sue Fleming, ultimately costing her her life. On the surface, the crime scene appeared to be a robbery gone wrong, but the closer they looked, the more her strangulation began to tell a different story, one of a personal, calculated execution staged to look like a crime of opportunity. Amy was born on July 22, 1970, to Stanley and Sue Todd. She was raised on a farm in rural DeKalb County, Illinois, where hard work was part of her everyday life. From a young age, she learned responsibility and independence, and those traits followed her into adulthood. She worked her way through high school and college and worked at a local diner, and was known by many as dependable, friendly, and willing to help wherever she was needed. By her mid-20s, Amy had built the life she always wanted, a teaching job at Indian Creek Middle School in Waterman, Illinois, and a marriage to Derek Fleming. At school, her students admired her, and she was well liked by her colleagues. Amy loved teaching, and she genuinely showed care for her students. When she wasn't teaching, she and Derek ran a show cattle business together and were deeply connected to the local farming community. They lived together in a rural home along U.S. Route 30, near the town of Lee, Illinois. On the night of the murder, Derek was away in Denver, Colorado, attending the National Western Stock Show. The following morning, when Amy failed to show up for work and never called or checked in, her coworkers began to worry. This was very out of character for Amy because she was known as a very reliable person. Eventually, 2 of her fellow teachers decided something had to be wrong and drove out to her home to check on her, arriving at around 9:30 that morning. The first odd thing was Amy's car still parked in the driveway. They knocked on the door and called out for Amy, but there was no answer. With the door unlocked, they made their way in and tragically found Amy's body. When investigators arrived, they noticed something odd. While the Sharp VCR and Quasar microwave had been taken, Amy's purse had been left untouched. There was also no sign of forced entry, leading investigators to believe she may have willingly let her killer in. Unfortunately, the crime scene was compromised due to the number of people rushing in and out of the small house, including her colleagues and first responders from the local volunteer fire department. This made it that much more difficult for investigators to find a clean DNA profile or fingerprints from the killer. While both were found, neither has ever led to her killer. 2 weeks after the murder, in late January 1996, the Lee County Sheriff's Department received 2 letters from someone claiming to have intimate knowledge of the crime. While investigators have never released information on the contents of the letters, they say that they were, and I quote, very helpful. They felt the letters were sincere, especially since the writer had highly specific details about the crime. The FBI worked up a behavioral profile of the suspect and suggested it was likely someone Amy was familiar with, and also concluded that the scene was likely staged to look like a robbery. However, even then, a suspect could not be identified. Over the years, more than 500 interviews have been conducted. If you have any information about the murder of Amy Sue Fleming, please call the Lee County Sheriff's Office at 815-284-5217, extension 6, or call Lee Crime Stoppers at 888-228-4488. Amy was murdered on the night of January 10, 1996, and as of March 2026, this case remains unsolved. For 30 years, the small town of Rantoul, Illinois, whispered rumors about the disappearance of Jamie Harper, a 20-year-old who had her whole life ahead of her. Her case is part of a decades-long mystery involving 3 missing women, a notorious area known as Dogtown, and a circle of people who know exactly what happened that night. Jamie was born on November 29, 1986, and at the time of her disappearance was living with her mother, Susan Carrere, in Paxton, Illinois. She unfortunately suffered from epilepsy and relied on daily medication to prevent seizures and never went anywhere without it. Unfortunately, she wasn't reported missing until a week after her disappearance. Her mother had assumed she was simply staying with friends, something she occasionally did. The last time her mother saw her was on March 9, 2007, when she left with her boyfriend, Josh Knibb, to attend a party in the 1300 block of Laurel Drive in Rantoul. That was the last time she ever saw her daughter. After a week had gone by with no communication, Susan reported her daughter missing. Witnesses later said that at around 4:30 a.m. on March 10th, Jamie left the party with a different man, who later returned alone. Josh had left the party early, saying he had to, and I quote, take care of things, and promised Jamie she would have a ride home or to a friend's house where she planned to stay. Not long after she vanished, police received an anonymous tip claiming she had overdosed and that her body could be found in an area of Dogtown. This area consists of 3 gravel pits, which have been searched multiple times over the years in connection with other missing person cases. However, nothing related to Jamie's case was located. Interestingly, Jamie's disappearance is not the only one tied to this area. 10 years earlier, in 1997, 19-year-old Heather Dawn Zimmerman also disappeared after attending a party in Rantoul. She'd left her parents' home in rural Gifford, Illinois, on May 26, 1997, at 8:30 p.m. after grabbing a soda from the fridge and telling her parents goodbye. They had no idea it would be the last time they ever spoke to their daughter. Heather didn't own a car and rode with a friend to the party. She then left the party with a man who allegedly dropped her off at the end of her parents' driveway at approximately 3 a.m. However, police have never been able to confirm that. Here's the shocking part. One man has been linked to both cases, and while investigators have not publicly stated whether that was the same man who dropped them off, it's strongly implied. Also, many people last known to have seen Heather alive are also connected to Jamie's final night. Two names have frequently been mentioned in online circles, Jeremy Ram and Mike Widmer, but they've never been publicly named suspects or charged with any crimes related to her disappearance. Their names come up strictly through community discussion, not official statements. What we know for sure is that they're connected to the social group at the party, and their timelines cross paths with both women. In June of 1997, 1 month after Heather disappeared, an unidentified caller claimed her body was in a borrow pit, but searches turned up nothing. In November 1998, law enforcement searched a gravel pit again after K-9 units alerted to possible human remains, but once again they were left empty-handed. As for Jamie, the searches for her have ended just the same. There's also another missing woman, Penny Dawn Lease, who many locals associate with the same region. She was last seen on June 2, 1989, leaving the Omni Fitness Center in the Urbana-Champaign area with a male companion, about 15 miles from Rantoul. Just like Jamie and Heather, Penny disappeared without a trace, and foul play is suspected in her case. In 1996, she was declared legally dead. While Penny's case doesn't involve a party, many people in the community still group her with Jamie and Heather because all three of their disappearances occurred under troubling circumstances in the same area. If you have information about the disappearances of Jamie Harper, Heather Zimmerman, or Penny Dawn Lease, please contact the Rantoul Police Department at 217-892-2103. All three women disappeared in the late 80s and mid-90s, and as of March 2026, their cases remain unsolved.